Time to tell you a little bit about the trip we had to Egypt and Saudi Arabia just a few days before Christmas here. Merry Christmas to everyone. Still suffering from a little bit of jet lag, but a lot of adrenaline was pumped on that trip. In fact, today I want to talk about the Saudi Arabian side of the trip because it might be the most interesting of all, because very few people have gone to Saudi Arabia, and in recent decades, people have seemed to uncover more and more evidence that the real Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, not on the Sinai Peninsula, as has been thought since about the 300s AD, when the mother of Constantine, Helena, decided that was the spot that Mount Sinai was and where St. Catherine's Monastery is now. For those of you watching on our YouTube channel, you know the Sinai Peninsula. Well, right down at the bottom of that there is where they think Mount Sinai is, and it's been the traditional site for the past, say, 1,700 years. But that site was picked as the site about 1,700 years after the Exodus. And yet the ancient writers prior to, the ancient writers going all the way back to Paul in Galatians talks about Sinai being in Arabia. You also had the Septuagint from about 250 BC, speaking of Mount Sinai being in the Arabian location. Philo of Alexandria, Origen, a 3rd century writer, Eusebius, a 4th century writer, Jerome, also a 4th century writer. Even the Quran seems to indicate that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Now, there is some dispute. Could the Sinai Peninsula have been considered part of Arabia? And yes, it could be considered part of Arabia, but it seems that Mount Sinai is in the land of Midian, and Midian has always been in what is now known as Saudi Arabia. That is on the eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba. Again, looking at the Sinai Peninsula, you've got the Red Sea where the Suez Canal is now, closest to Egypt. The other side of that peninsula is where the Gulf of Aqaba is, and that is also known as the Red Sea. And that is where at least some modern researchers are saying that the crossing of the Red Sea took place from a place called Nuweiba, which again is on the eastern side of the Sinai Peninsula, and that cross into a crossing, about a 10-mile crossing into what is now known as Saudi Arabia, was where the Israelites crossed. There's a natural land bridge underneath the water there where they could have crossed. And when they got to the other side, they were in what we now call modern-day Saudi Arabia. And the mountain that has been identified as the probable Mount Sinai is called Jabal al-Lawz, right next to another peak known as Jabal al-Musa. Jabal al-Lawz means the mountain, or the mountain of almonds, and Jabal al-Musa means the mountain of Moses. And that area for years has been thought of by the locals as the real Mount Sinai. Now, in the modern era, there have been people that have gone into Saudi Arabia. The earliest known person in the modern area was a guy by the name of Ron Wyatt. And Ron Wyatt had a bit of a con man reputation because he said a lot of crazy things that weren't true. But that doesn't necessarily mean he was wrong about Mount Sinai. There's something known, as you know, in logic called the genetic fallacy. And that is discounting someone's conclusion because you don't like their reputation, or you think that they have some sort of problem with their character, and that automatically rules out what they say. Well, it might give you pause, certainly, but instead of looking at the source of the claim, you need to look at the evidence for the claim to discover whether or not the claim is true. After Ron Wyatt went in there, I think in 1984, Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams went in there in 1988. I later met and have become friends with Bob Cornuke. I've done several trips with Bob. Larry Williams, by the way, is the father of Michelle Williams, the actress. And Larry Williams also ran for, I think, senator in Montana many years ago. He was endorsed by Ronald Reagan. He did not win the Senate race. But Larry and Bob both went in there under false pretenses way back in 1988. It was illegal to go into that area, but they were. In fact, at one of their two expeditions, they were arrested. They had a lot of their camera equipment confiscated. They were able to get some pictures out in their two expeditions back in 1988. They have since made a documentary on it. You can probably see it on YouTube. I think it's called The Mountain of God or The Mountain of Fire. You can search for it. It's a very interesting 53-minute or so documentary on some of the things they saw. They've each written a book. I think Bob's book is called Mountain of God. I can't remember Larry's book, but they have talked about that for many years. Bob Cornuke has been back there since then. And then during 1992 to 2003, there were two workers for Aramco. What's Aramco? Aramco is the Arabian American oil company that I believe is stationed in Dhahran, which is on the other side of Saudi Arabia. When I was in the Navy back in 1988, 1989, I went to Dhahran in a naval capacity and spent several months there. And Aramco was a big company at the time. Well, right after that, in 1992, Jim and Penny Caldwell went to Saudi Arabia, and they had the ability to travel the country, and they made 15 expeditions in those 11 years to this area known as Jabal al-Lawz, which is undisputably the land of Midian in the Bible. They actually went up the mountain as we did. I'll tell you about that a little bit later in the program. So they sent some pictures back and pulled some artifacts out of there. They discovered that much of the mountain had been fenced off. And there were signs, which we saw when we were there just last week, that said this is an archaeological area, keep out. Now, some of the fencing has been knocked down since then, but the Saudi government appeared to not wanted to have people go in there. Then from 2001 to 2006, a doctor by the name of Sung Hak Kim, a chiropractor actually from Korea, was the private physician to Prince Majid, who was the governor of Mecca and the brother of the king. And he was actually in Saudi Arabia from 1987 to 2006. And from 2001 to 2006, he made 12 expeditions to the area. Being the private doctor of the governor of Mecca gave him free reign, and he traveled the area and saw many of the things that we saw last week in Saudi Arabia. And in fact, I went to meet Dr. Kim along with Bob Cornuke and Jim and Penny Caldwell in Korea in December of 2006. We took a trip out there just to see some of the artifacts that he had brought home from Saudi Arabia. And we saw many of these artifacts and talked to him at length about what his experience was in Saudi Arabia. So for me, this has been a point of interest for about 18 years. When I first met Bob Cornuke back in 2005, then I met Jim and Penny, and I met Dr. Kim out in Korea. And we wanted to compare notes. And I had not been to Saudi Arabia, at least not this side of Saudi Arabia, until just last week. So what I want to do in this program is explain what's out there and leave the decision-making to you as to whether or not you think this could be, well, it certainly could be, but is it the real Mount Sinai? Because when you look at all the evidence, there's so much circumstantial evidence in and around this mountain that really seems to put forth the idea that this is really where Moses went. This is really where Elijah went. This is where Moses got the 10 Commandments. This might be where Paul went after he became a Christian and said he went to Arabia. He might have gone to this mountain, the mountain of God. We're going to talk about it for the rest of the program, so don't go anywhere. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with me, Frank Turek, on the American Family Radio Network. Merry Christmas, back in just 2 minutes. Where is the real Mount Sinai? Is it on the Sinai Peninsula, or is it in the land of Midian, modern-day Saudi Arabia, northwest Saudi Arabia, to the west of the modern town of Tabuk, Saudi Arabia, near the Gulf of Aqaba? That's what we're talking about today. And just to give you a little bit of that background, you say, why haven't archaeologists gone there and investigated all this? Well, until recently, they couldn't. It was off limits. Now, Saudi Arabia has begun to open up the area. In fact, they're building an area in this section of Saudi Arabia called NEOM, N-E-O-M. And if you Google this, you can find all you want to know about it. They're building some amazing hotels, some amazing resorts in the area. It is actually a very pretty part of the country. We went through there in forerunners, and we're driving through the desert, and we would see some sort of rock formation. I'd said to the guide, Waleed, we got to go over and see that. We just drive across the desert to do so. In fact, we stayed out in the desert at the foot of this mountain, Jabal al-Lawz, and we drove all around the area. And we're going to show you a lot of video footage of this in the coming months. We're gathering it all now. We took hours and hours of video, and this is a podcast. Yes, we do have a YouTube version of this, but it's not fair to the people who listen to it to be going through a lot of video when you really can't see it. So if you keep an eye on our YouTube channel, you'll see some of it. We've put some of it already up in shorts. So short little videos from Saudi Arabia. We got to piece together a lot of it so it'll be coherent for you to see what's actually out there in the land of Midian, Saudi Arabia. Now, people will argue over if it is Saudi Arabia, where did they cross? There's two possible crossing sites. There's what I mentioned earlier, Nuweiba, which fits the biblical description perfectly, because you're passing through these mountains in this narrow trail, and then it opens up to a beach known as Nuweiba. And you could see how they were trapped there. They couldn't go back through that mountain pass because the Egyptian army was pursuing them. So they're stuck on the beach with mountains all around them. And that appears to be the proper crossing point. The other possible crossing point is at the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula. There's the Straits of Tiran, which could have been the crossing point as well. But people who favor the Saudi location for Mount Sinai seem to think that the crossing point was at Nuweiba. Now, when you come across at Nuweiba, and we went to the beach, we're going to put a short up and a longer video up shortly. We went to that beach in forerunners, and we got there right about sunset. So we got some beautiful video of it. And you'll see the Saudi side, and we're looking across to the Egyptian side. After you get across that Gulf of Aqaba, which is also known as the Red Sea, Yam Suf in the Bible, which means sea end, when you cross that crossing point, you'll eventually get to an area known as the Bitter Springs. If you go to Exodus chapter 15, verse 23 says this, and they came to Marah. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. And if you remember the story, Moses throws a tree in there, and the bitter springs turn sweet. Well, they've found this area on this route from the crossing point, which had bitter springs. By the way, it seems to me that throwing a tree into the water is a foreshadowing of Christ being hung on a tree. He turns our bitter relationship with God sweet. Yes, it's an historical event, but it's also a metaphor for what Christ does for us. Throwing the tree into the water turns the bitter water sweet. By the way, we're going to be starting a new series on our TV program, and we're going to start streaming it on January 20th. The title of the series is called The Bible You Never Knew, and the subtitle is Stories Stitched by the Hand of God. There are so many stories in the Bible that are stitched together across generations that when you see this, you go, only God could have stitched this together. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're not going to talk about that here. I'm just putting the bug in your ear. I also, though, do want to put a bug in your ear about the current TV series, because providentially, before we went to Egypt and Saudi Arabia, we did a 22 one-hour lesson series called Digging Up the Bible. And many of the things we're talking about right now, we had already covered. I just hadn't been to the location yet. So at 9 p.m. Eastern time, on Wednesday nights, you can watch our series. We just did the 5th 1 hour lesson this past Wednesday. I don't think we're going to be on over Christmas, so you're going to have to wait maybe a week or two. But if you go to our YouTube channel, not our YouTube channel, sorry. If you go to our website at 9 p.m. Eastern time, the crossexamine.org website, and click on TV, you can watch the show streaming live. And for all 22 lessons every Wednesday night, if you go there, you'll see it. You can also watch this on NRB TV on DirecTV channel 378. DirecTV channel 378. It's also on Roku. If you have Roku, just look for the National Religious Broadcast TV network on Roku at 9 p.m. on Wednesday, and you can see it. And we're going through the Exodus stuff right now, so it's providential we're talking about it right now. So you come across Nuweiba, and you eventually get to the Bitter Springs. A few verses later in Exodus 15, you read this. Then, these are the Israelites now, led by Moses through the wilderness after they crossed the Red Sea. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms, and they camped there beside the waters. In other words, there's an oasis on the way. Well, in Saudi Arabia, you will see that oasis. Now, on our trip, we didn't see it. We couldn't go to Elim because it's part of Neom, and they're doing a lot of construction there, and they didn't want anybody in that area, but other people have been there. In fact, Bob Cornuke has been there. Joel Richardson has been there. The author Joel Richardson. I have a little video from Joel. He's been there several times. We'll play, hopefully, toward the end of this program, because he's got video of these palms. Now, there's more than 70 now, but this oasis fits the route that it appears the Israelites took. Then, if you come around to the other side of the area, you're going to find the split rock of Horeb. And this is one place we were able to see. Now, when you read it in Exodus 17, it says this: Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink. Because you see, by Exodus 17, they're starting to complain. Moses, you brought us out here in the wilderness just to die. I mean, we're thirsty. We need something to drink. And so Moses strikes a rock. Now, in reading this in Exodus 17, you might think, well, he struck a little boulder. You know, there's a little boulder on the side of the road, and he just tapped it with his staff, and boom, so water started trickling out, and that fed everybody. Now, there's a bit of a controversy over how many people did actually come across in the Exodus, and it depends on how you translate the Hebrew word Eleph. If you translate it thousands, could be translated that way. That's the typical translation. There were 600,000 men, not including women and children. So if you add it all up, you might say there were 2 million people coming across on the Exodus to the land of Midian. If you translate it units, then there were fewer number of people. But that's controversial. We're not exactly sure. Let's just go with the bigger number. Let's say there were 2 million people that came across. If you just struck a little boulder and a water trickled out, you wouldn't be able to give water to all these people and livestock, by the way. Well, when you go to the land of Midian, not far from Jabal al-Lawz, you will see this split rock that is, I don't know, this thing has to be 100 feet high. It's a huge rock, and you've got to climb up to it. And if you go to our YouTube channel and look at one of the shorts, you will see it, me standing before the rock talking about it. And in future video, we're going to show you people. And when you see the people climbing up the path toward this rock, you're going to go, this thing is huge. And it is. And there's signs of water erosion all around it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the the desert there in Saudi Arabia gets like a 1/4 inch of rain a year. I think it's 30 milliliters of rain a year on average. Not very much. And there's signs of water erosion on this rock and around this rock. You say, well, Frank, you wouldn't get water erosion if it just exploded with water for a little while. Yeah, you might not, but it doesn't, the text doesn't say when the water stopped flowing. It could have flowed there for years and created this lake because there's a natural lake bed there and streams there. In fact, one geologist who visited the area said there is a very large aquifer underneath this rock. Now, God doesn't need an aquifer to have this split rock split open and water gush out, but he could have used that aquifer to do so. So the rock of Horeb, we call it, and Horeb, by the way, it seems more of an area than necessarily a mountain. The area of Horeb, he split the rock and water came out, and there's evidence that this is indeed the case in this area. By the way, Psalm 78 also talks about the split rock of Horeb. It says in Psalm 78, he split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them abundant drink like the ocean depths. Behold, he struck the rocks so that the waters gushed out and streams were overflowing. And so when you go there and you see this, you go, well, this is more circumstantial evidence. Perhaps we're in the right place. Now, I'm not a geologist. I'm not an archaeologist. And one of the problems with this area is that, as I say, archaeologists, very few have been in there. I talked to my friend Titus Kennedy today, and hopefully we can get some archaeologists in there to look at this and date this stuff and give us some firmer data, but it sure seems from a circumstantial perspective, this could be the real Mount Sinai. I'm Frank Turek. Don't go anywhere. We got a lot more. Merry Christmas. Ladies and gentlemen, does what we do here at Cross-Examine make any real difference? Well, the spontaneous, non-solicited, I should say, testimonies we get, I think the answer is yes, and praise the Lord for that. Here's a few testimonies, just so you know. I don't talk about this much, but it is the end of the year, and so many of the great people out there like you who donate to us need to know that we are making a real difference. And I'm going to get to back to the Mount Sinai material here in just a minute. But one person said this: in the beginning of my faith, Cross-Examine was the key player in teaching me about the Bible, Christ, and apologetics, and can 100% and 100% played a crucial role in my salvation. Another writer writes in and says, Dr. Turek brought me to Jesus when I was trying to disprove Jesus. Well, I had maybe a part in that, but the Holy Spirit had something to do with it as well. But God uses all of us, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. The Holy Spirit can use all of us. Another person writes in and says, Mr. Frank brought me back to Christ again through a short video clip. A short video clip. Actually, this one was posted by our friend Brandon over there at A Daily Dose of Wisdom. Brandon McGuire does some great work over there. He's reposting some of our videos, and people have seen, this person saw that video over there at Daily Dose of Wisdom. Another writes in, I'm eternally grateful for Frank. Came across him 10 months ago with an irrational bias against Christianity. It's been a wild 10 months, but here I am, a humble believer, or as I prefer, a knower. There's others too, but I won't belabor the point. I do want to mention that so far in 2024, just through social media, we have impacted people 110 million times. That's when you add up all our social media, all of our presentations, all of our podcast listens, 110 million times. That's not counting overseas. And you may know we're spreading this overseas. We've now got 15 foreign language websites. We've translated over 3,000 videos and over 1,200 articles into different languages, including Arabic, by the way, which, of course, is the language of the land of Midian, Saudi Arabia, the land of Egypt, the places we're trying to reach. And we're all doing that because you donate. And 100% of your donations go to ministry, 0% to buildings. We have no buildings. We're completely virtual. We come to you. You don't come to us. We're trying to save money, use the money most wisely in order to reach people where they are. We're doing this on college campuses, on high school campuses, at churches, on the internet, through these different websites all over the country. We're doing it through Kingdom AI, and it's all funded by you. 96% of what we do is through donors. We do have some income coming in from certain products like online courses. By the way, the online course, How to Interpret Your Bible, I'm going to be your instructor. It starts January 9th. Go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. You'll see it there. Makes a great gift for Christmas. So check that all out. So thank you. Go to crossexamine.org, click on donate. It's a tax-deductible donation. You can also send us a check. The website, it has the address as well. And we thank you. 40% of our donations come into our ministry in the last month, and they fuel us for the rest of the year. So enough about that. Thank you for donating. And as Jesus said, use your money. He says this in Luke 16 in the parable of the unjust steward. Use your money to win people to Christ, so when the money runs out and you go to heaven, you'll be welcomed into heaven by these folks. So thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's go back to what we are talking about here, and that is Mount Sinai. Is the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia? And we mentioned the split rock of Horeb. Go to our YouTube channel or our Instagram page to see a little video about that. And as I say, we are going to release some more video about that and so much more about the trip to Egypt and Saudi Arabia. So you'll see that here soon. If you go to Exodus 24, you'll also see writings about an altar. In Exodus 24, of course, he gets the 10 commandments in Exodus 20. In Exodus 24, it says this, and Moses wrote down all those words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, yet, you know what's coming next. It seems we may have found this altar. Not only that, we found a corral that's shaped like a chevron. And you can still see it there on the ground. And livestock experts have been there and said, this is what you would build if you were trying to corral animals for sacrifice. You'd put them through this chevron-shaped rock formation. It's obviously put together by human beings. You would put them through this in order to take them to an altar where they could be sacrificed. And we're going to put some video up that you're going to see this. And you can see it aerially. You can see it on the ground. In fact, when we climb the mountain, I'm walking across an area trying to get to Elijah's cave. And I happened to look down and I told the whole climbing group, stop, look at that. When you look at it from the mountain, you go, wow, you can see it clear as day. That's a corral trying to get animals into a particular point where they could be sacrificed, and it takes them right to what looks like an altar of uncut stones. And around this, we've seen 9 of 12 circular small pillars that are made. They're obviously cut in this kind of white marble. They're very round, and they're only about 1.5 feet or so high. And we don't know if these were 12 pillars or elements of 12 pillars that are talked about in Exodus 24, but they could be. Now, other people have said they've seen 12. I only saw 9 down there. I don't know where the other 3 are. But it's at the base of the mountain near an ancient stream that came off the mountain where you would sacrifice animals as God commanded Moses to do, to build an altar at the foot of the mountain. You can see all this. Now, about, let's see, this has to be 1/2 mile, 3/4 of the mile further away from the mountain. You find what I'm about to read to you. At least it could be what I'm about to read to you. If you go to Exodus 32, this is where Aaron makes the golden calf. You know the story. Moses spends too much time up on the mountain, and despite the Israelites seeing miracle after miracle to get to where they are, they suddenly go, you know what? Where's this guy Moses? We don't know what happened to him. Let's build an altar. And it says Aaron took all the gold. And in Exodus 32, verses 4 and 5, it says, and Aaron took gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool, and he made it into a molten calf. He built an altar before it. A little bit later in that chapter, Moses comes down the mountain. It says this, verse 19, and Moses, or it says, as soon as Moses came near the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands, and he shattered them at the foot of the mountain. Now, not far from the foot of the mountain, there is this natural rock formation. All these big boulders are piled up on one another, and there are petroglyphs of calves, of cows, and other carvings all over this thing. I just showed you one of them in the video you can see on Instagram or the Cross-Examined YouTube channel, but there are scores of these all over this rock formation, and they're in sight of Jabal al-Lawz, which has a blackened top. Now, the blackened top does not mean that was burnt, because when God came down, he burned the mountain. That blackened top is on several mountains in Saudi Arabia. That is the result of a basalt. That's basalt. It doesn't appear it's the result of a burning, but it sure does look cool. Let me tell you that. It looks like God did come down there. Of course, if he wanted to miraculously make it look that way, he could have. I'm just saying there is a natural explanation. That is a basalt formation up there. But within view of Jabal al-Lawz, and you could see it when we went up this mountain. You could see this off in the distance. You could see this area where Aaron could have had the golden calf. And this makes sense that they could have been worshiping the golden calf, because where did they just come from? They came from Egypt. They spent 430 years in Egypt. And the Egyptians, one of their so-called gods was the cow god Hathor. And we have depictions, carvings in these rock formations of people standing under cows with their hands up as if they're worshiping the cow. Is this proof that this took place? No, it's not. It's just evidence. It could be, but maybe it's not. We don't know. There was an archaeologist out there, I think his name is Zelke, if I'm not mistaken, from George Washington University. I happened to graduate from George Washington University with a master's degree, but I did not know of him then. He may not have been there. That was 30 plus years ago. But Rhonda Sand had him out there, and he said these carvings could be from the Exodus period. But we need more archaeologists to go out there and date these things. We're not sure. We're just saying at this point, it's circumstantially interesting. I mean, if this is the real Mount Sinai, you would expect to find this. That's all we're saying at this point. We can't prove it, but we would expect to find it. By the way, this rock formation with the petroglyphs, with the cows all around, on it all over the place, and other carvings, surrounded by a fence with a sign that says this: archaeological area, warning, it is unlawful to trespass. Violators are subject to penalties stipulated in the antiquities regulations passed by royal decree. And then it puts the royal decree out there. I have a picture of Jim and Penny Caldwell with the fence behind them and this sign, standing in front of this sign. That sign is still there, but the gate is open. You can go in it. And it seems like the Saudi government is opening this area up. And one of the reasons they're building Neom is to get another source of income other than oil. So they want tourism. So now they may be opening up this area to tourism. And all around this area, there are roads being put in. There are dump trucks everywhere, construction trucks, small buildings, and even large buildings being built out in the desert, not far from Jabal al-Lawz. So this could be the area of the golden calf. Again, we need archaeologists to go out there. Titus Kennedy knows about it now. I don't know if he can go or people he knows can go. But we need people other than just me and Joel Richardson and Bob Cornuke and Jim and Penny Caldwell and Dr. Kim. We need other people to go out there and really evaluate this and date it. But man, is it interesting. A lot more. Final segment. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with me, Frank Turek, back in 2 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about what could be the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia today. Merry Christmas. If you're just listening to this on the American Family Radio Network and you're going, man, I missed the first 3 segments of the show, go look for the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. You can hear it at your leisure. By the way, we also do a podcast midweek. It's not broadcast on AFR. So wherever you find podcasts, go to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and you will find it. If you really want to get into the details from a geologist perspective, you want to get this book, those of you that are watching on the YouTube channel. This book is massive. It's the the Exodus Mysteries of Midian, Sinai, and Jabal al-Lawz by Dr. Glenn A. Fritz. He goes into a lot of what we're talking about here. From a more popular perspective, though, you may want to get Joel Richardson's book on Mount Sinai. I don't have it in front of me, but you'll be able to find it. Joel is an author. He's been to this area many times. Bob Cornuke has a book called The Mountain of God. You can check that out. But we're really waiting for some real professionals to get out there. The closest is this book by Glenn Fritz, but he's not an archaeologist. He's a geologist. So hopefully more will be coming out about this. By the way, Dr. Kim, the guy I mentioned earlier, was traveling around Tabuk and found many inscriptions on rocks all over the area, as did we when we were driving around. He actually found some chariot inscriptions in rocks not far from Tabuk. He also found a menorah, which I'm looking at right now. And he took this picture in 2006, engraved into rock. Again, we need archaeologists to come out and look at this, but it seems that the Israelites were in this area. In fact, years ago when I was with Jim and Penny Caldwell in Korea, they pulled out an old map of Saudi Arabia. And if you want to see where the Israelites went in their travels, Numbers 33 has a listing of everywhere they went. And one of the little areas they went to, a little town, little village, whatever it was a place called Beni Jaakan. And Penny pulled out this old Saudi Arabian map and showed me in Saudi Arabia, this little town, Beni Jaakan. Translation, what we mean to say here is when they wandered on the Saudi Peninsula, not the Sinai Peninsula. If our theory is correct here. And still, as I say, we got to get archaeologists on this. Let's go to 1 Kings for a second. 1 Kings 19 talks about Elijah, who's running from Jezebel. It says, so Elijah arose, ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then he came there to a cave and lodged there. He's running from Jezebel. She must have been a really bad woman, because I can tell you, running all the way to Saudi Arabia and then climbing this mountain to get into that cave, you got to be a billy goat to do that. First of all, it took us 3 hours to get up to the mountain, which, by the way, according to our guide, was a record. He took us very direct. He didn't take us to many switchbacks. He took us almost straight up the mountain. And you'll see some of these videos on our YouTube channel. It was 10 of us started out. Only 5 of us made it all the way there, including the guide. The guide was great. But it was me, 2 other folks who are men in their 60s, my friend John Garrett and Jim Rang, who were on the trip. They're both 68 years old. And then we had Haley Roberts, who she is 28, a black belt in Taekwondo, and she's also a black belt in mountain climbing, because she zipped right up that mountain when us guys in our 60s are going, Haley, wait up. And by the way, the guides, some of them are smokers, they're just strolling up there smoking, and we're like, hey, wait up, because they're acclimated to it. It's up over 7,000 feet when you peek out. And so it's not a hike. It's a hike and a climb. In fact, it's one notch below needing to use ropes. Okay, because there are some areas where you're just a few feet from a sheer cliff, and the guide's saying, "Put your foot here, put your hand here," because you can't slip. If you slip, you're gonna die, basically. So there were spots like that where it was a little bit concerning on the climb. And when, after we peaked out, coming back down, the guide goes, "Hey, you want to go to Elijah's cave?" And Haley's going at 28, "Yeah, let's go. And the 60-year-old guys are going, do we have to? Yeah, let's go. Okay, so we did, which required another couple hours of climbing. And getting out to Elijah's cave was really difficult. But when we got there, that's when we looked down and we saw the chevron down in the valley, the corral shaped in the shape of a chevron. And we also saw, not only from the peak, but from Elijah's cave, we could see the area which could have been the golden calf area. You can see all this stuff. It's amazing. By the way, it's more difficult coming down than going up. And so coming down actually took a little longer than going up. But going up, look, you got to be in shape to do it. I'm in decent shape, especially for being 63. But if you're carrying extra weight, you ain't going to make it up that mountain. It's a strain, especially if you want to do it in one day. The whole round trip was 7.5 hours. And you got to bring a lot of water, electrolytes, that kind of thing. Almost ran out. I must have had almost a gallon, almost ran out. But the cave is there. And then, not far from the mountain, we found an ancient cemetery. Not we went there. Others have found it. And this could be the area where the 3,000 who were executed after worshiping the golden calf were laid. And there's a Japanese archaeology team excavating there now. They just started to excavate right after we got there. We saw some of their excavations. That is in an area, hundreds of graves. In fact, the graveyard is at least 100 yards by 100 yards. And it's bigger than that, actually, because there's standing stones all around that. These are pre-Islamic graves. Muslims don't allow these large standing stones. These are pre-Islamic graves. But we need, again, archaeologists to go out there and really evaluate this. And if they do, we'll get better. We'll get an answer one way or the other. Could this really be the place where all these folks were buried? It's off the beaten path. This is in the middle of the desert. You're not going to have this many graves out there in the middle of the desert. So this is more circumstantial evidence. In fact, to sum it all up, here's what you get. If this really is the real Mount Sinai, it's going to be probably in the land of Midian. You're going to find bitter springs. You're going to find the oasis known as Elim. You're also going to find a large plain to camp near Sinai. I didn't mention that, but there's a very large plain right behind what we call the golden calf altar. You're going to find a split rock with enough water and stream from Sinai. You're going to find the cave of Elijah. You're going to find an altar with a livestock corral, and ash remains there, by the way, which still need to be excavated. We found also 9 pillars. Others have said there's 12. You're going to find inscriptions, perhaps, of a golden calf worship. You're also going to find inscriptions of sexual immorality. There's a stone we call the orgy stone there. I don't have time to tell you about that, but it's obvious what they're doing there. You're going to find probably a large grave site. You're also going to find inscriptions in the area of Proto-Hebrew, Hebrew, and menorahs. This is all found in the area. Now, could this just be coincidence? Yeah, it could be. Could be coincidence. In fact, Joel Richardson has a little video on this that we'll put in the show notes. You can watch his little video where he goes, could this be all coincidence? It could be. But if this is the real Mount Sinai, these are the kind of things that you would expect to find. In fact, here's the way probability theory works. I'm no expert on it, but I've been told this by people who are experts. When you're trying to discover whether something is more probable or not, when you look at the evidence, you also have to look at it from another perspective. What's the other perspective? The other perspective is, in this situation, if this is not Mount Sinai, would you expect to find all of these markers that it was. In other words, would you expect to find it in the land of Midian with bitter springs, an oasis, a large plain, a split rock, a cave, an altar with a livestock corral, inscriptions of golden calf worship, inscriptions of sexual immorality, a large gravesite, and inscriptions of Proto-Hebrew, Hebrew, and even menorahs? Would you expect to find all this if it wasn't the land where Mount Sinai is? Yeah, you probably wouldn't expect to find all that, would you? So is it the real Mount Sinai? I don't know. But if I had to guess, I'd say it is. In fact, I'd say it's beyond 80% probable this is the real Mount Sinai. But it's controversial. And until archaeologists get in there and really look at it with an open mind and do some more investigation, we can't be more sure than just to say it's probably Mount Sinai. We need to do more. I mean, the locals think it is. There's also Jethro's caves there, by the way, the land of Jethro. We didn't mention that. We saw that when we were over there. So Jethro, of course, is Moses' father-in-law. There's just so much going on. Now, we plan on going back there in a future trip. You might want to be a part of that, also with Egypt, and I'll tell you more about Egypt another time. That was a phenomenal trip as well. We're trying to put together a trip to either Israel or Footsteps of Paul next October. Keep an eye out for that. But by the way, when you go on a trip with Cross Examine, it's not just a vacation, it's an adventure. We try and do stuff that will challenge you and go to places that most people haven't gone. And we saw things people have rarely seen in Saudi Arabia and also in Egypt. And as I say, I'll tell you more about Egypt another time. We'll also put some other videos on our YouTube channel and on our Instagram page in the coming weeks and months. So keep an eye out for that. You can also sign up for our email, which we'll send you those videos via email once a week. So sign up for our email at crossexamine.org. And again, friends, thanks so much for your donations at the end of the year. They fuel us for the entire year. And 100% of what you give goes to ministry, 0% to building. So it's all done for Jesus, who came into this earth, added humanity to his deity about 2,000 years ago this Christmas. Thank God for him. Thank God for you. See you here next week. Lord willing, God bless.
If you're looking for solid answers to life's biggest questions, don't miss the latest episode of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, OnePlace, and Podchaser. Tune in, discover the truth, and share it with someone who needs it. Let's keep spreading the truth together.